David slams the Porsche keys on the desk. Amelia? Why are you in this office? Amelia slowly rotates her chair, a faint smile playing on her lips. Oh, here is perfect, she whispers. I'm here to finalize the purchase, David. David's face pales. You can't afford this. I sold it to the firm's top shareholder. Amelia leans forward, her voice like cold silk. I know everything, David. That shareholder is me. David's hand trembles. Now, let's talk about your job. The old wooden house in the New York suburbs didn't just hold memories, it breathed them. Every creak of the floorboards felt like my father's footsteps, steady and reassuring. I remember the way the light used to hit the cedar walls at sunset, turning the living room into a sanctuary of amber and gold. This was the place where I felt safest, the anchor my father left me before he passed. But lately, the air inside had grown thin. The sanctuary was starting to feel like a cage, and the wood seemed to groan under a weight that didn't belong to the structure. It was the weight of a marriage that was silently rotting from the inside out. I sat by the window, watching the dry leaves dance across the porch in a frantic, dying rhythm. I noticed the dust settling on the framed photographs on the mantel, the one of my father and me, smiling after we finished building the patio. I hadn't touched them in weeks. My world had become a series of quiet, painful observations. I was watching David, and David was becoming a stranger. The change didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion of everything I thought I knew. It started with the late nights. David would come home, his movements stiff, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. He'd head straight for the shower, trying to wash away more than just the grime of the city. I observed the way he held his phone. The grip was too tight, the screen always turned downward. A pattern was forming, a jagged line cutting through the life we had built. Then came the scent. It was a sharp, expensive perfume that smelled of steel and high-rise offices, completely out of place in our pine-scented home. I noticed it on his jacket, then on his skin. I didn't say a word. I just watched. I noticed the new clothes, the secret passwords, the way he suddenly looked through me instead of at me. You're being paranoid, he'd say whenever I tried to bridge the gap. His voice was always calm, but it was the kind of calm that precedes a disaster. He was a master of the subtle gaslight, making my instincts feel like hallucinations. He'd look at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if my concern was a burden he didn't have the energy to carry. I'm doing this for us, Amelia. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under at the firm? I'm trying to secure our future. But his eyes were focused on a future that clearly didn't include the woman standing right in front of him. I didn't answer. I just noticed the faint, triumphant smirk he'd hide whenever I backed down. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday. The New York sky was a bruised purple, and the wind was howling through the gaps in the window frames. David came home earlier than usual, carrying a leather briefcase like a weapon. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even look at the dinner I had prepared. He just cleared a space on the old dining table, pushing aside my father's favorite coaster. He laid out a stack of legal documents, the paper white and sterile against the warm wood. I need you to sign these, he said. He didn't ask. He stated it. It's a power of attorney for the house and the trust. The firm is looking into a major investment opportunity, and I need to show liquid assets. It's a formality to secure our legacy. He didn't say your house. He said our legacy. I looked at the pen in his hand. I noticed a small smudge on his cuff, the same color as the lipstick I'd seen in the photos on his hidden account. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical presence in the room. Sign it, he urged, sliding the pen toward me. For our future. I picked up the pen. It felt like 1,000 pounds. I looked at the signature line, then back at him. He didn't see the hurricane brewing in my gaze. He only saw a woman he thought he had successfully manipulated. If only he knew that I wasn't just signing away a property. I was signing away the last piece of my naivety. I watched my own signature flow onto the page, a perfect, elegant script. David snatched the papers back, his eyes gleaming with a greed he couldn't hide. He thought he had won. He had no idea that I had already spent the morning in a different office with a different set of lawyers. He thought he was selling my past. He didn't realize he was actually handing me his future. As he walked away, the floorboards creaked. One last warning from my father. I sat in the silence, listening to the wind and planning the exact moment I would watch his world burn. I observed the glow of the laptop screen in the dark study, the blue light carving sharp shadows across my face. On the luxury Manhattan living portal, there it was. My father's house, listed as a distressed asset for a quick liquidation. I noticed the agent's name, a close friend of David's. I noticed the price. It was the exact MSRP of a silver Porsche 911. David wasn't just selling a house. He was trading my childhood for a trophy to impress a woman who didn't know the difference between cedar and pine. I leaned back, the leather chair creaking like a warning. The storm behind my eyes remained perfectly hidden. I had noticed the pattern of his absences weeks ago. The late-night meetings that left him smelling of steel and expensive jasmine. I had observed the subtle changes in our joint account, the small, rhythmic siphoning of funds. David thought my silence was a sign of a wife who had stopped caring. He didn't realize that in my world, silence was the sound of a trap being set. I pulled up Chloe's Instagram. There she was, posing in a high-end showroom, her hand draped over the hood of a silver sports car. "My king always keeps his promises," the caption read. I noticed the reflection in the polished metal. David was standing there, a look of smug triumph on his face that I hadn't seen in years. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who thought he had finally won. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady. "Marcus," I said when the call connected. My voice was cold silk. "It's time." There was a brief silence. Marcus had been my father's attorney for decades, the only man who knew the true depth of the inheritance David had never been allowed to see. "Are you sure, Amelia?" he asked. "He's selling the property to a shell company." I watched a single leaf drift past the window. "I know. Let him. In fact, make sure the transaction goes through." "But Marcus, I want you to exercise my right of first refusal through Sterling and Associates." I heard the scratch of a pen on the other end. "And the board?" he asked. "Tell them their majority shareholder is coming out of the shadows. I want a full audit of all executive real estate dealings presented at the gala on Friday. And make sure David is on the guest list." I walked through the corridors of David's firm the next day, observing the glass walls and the hurried associates. They saw a woman in a navy suit, elegant and unassuming. They didn't see the woman who owned 40% of the floor they stood on. I saw David in the break room, laughing with his colleagues, his feet up on the table. He was already acting like a man who had made his fortune. He noticed me, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by that pitying, condescending look he used to keep me in my place. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dripping with forced patience. "Just running errands, David," I replied, my expression a blank canvas. "I just wanted to make sure you were coming to the gala on Friday. It's a big night for the firm." He chuckled, patting my hand. "Of course, babe. I wouldn't miss it. I have a feeling things are finally going to change for us." "I have that feeling too," I whispered. I noticed the faint smell of jasmine on his jacket. I noticed the way he didn't look me in the eye. I observed the nan on his forehead, the sign of a man who was lying to himself as much as he was lying to me. He thought he was playing a masterstroke. He didn't know that every move he made was being recorded, analyzed, and countered. He was selling a house to buy a car, unaware that he was actually selling his career to the woman he had spent years trying to diminish. I returned to the study and sat in the dark. The smell of the old wood was still there, a reminder of where I came from. I observed the files Marcus had sent over. The shell company David had created was a mess, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight back to his corporate account. I noticed the arrogance in his errors. He didn't think I was smart enough to look. He didn't think I was strong enough to act. I allowed a faint smile to touch my lips. The glass was already cracked. Friday night, the whole world would watch it shatter. David wanted a new car. I was going to give him a front row seat to his own destruction. The dealership was a shrine to excess, all glass and polished chrome that reflected David's self-satisfied grin. Chloe was twirling her hair, her laughter echoing too loudly against the sterile walls. She was draped over the hood of a silver Porsche 911, her fingers tracing the curve of the fender with neon pink nails. It's perfect, David. It's so much better than that dreary old place, she chirped, her voice a sharp contrast to the silence I had cultivated at home. David let out a short, sharp laugh, adjusted his luxury watch, and nodded. That house was a relic, Chloe. A burden. Amelia thought it was sacred, but in this world, everything has a price. I observed them through the high-resolution feed on my screen, the images transmitted in real time from a private investigator's hidden lens. David looked like a man who had finally escaped a prison, unaware that he was simply walking into a different kind of cell. He was telling the salesman about the dilapidated asset he had just offloaded. Old wood, leaky roof, sentimental nonsense, he sneered, his voice dripping with the kind of confidence only a man who thinks he's outsmarted everyone can possess. Chloe giggled, checking her reflection in the car window. I can't wait to see her face when she realizes you've actually done something useful with her inheritance. David smirked, that familiar, condescending expression that used to make my skin crawl. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. He thought he had taken the one thing I loved and turned it into the one thing he wanted. I watched the way he carried himself, the arrogance in his stride, the way he looked at the world as if it were a game he had already won. He was already mentally driving that car down the coast, Chloe by his side, leaving the old Amelia behind. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with a flourish, expecting a routine confirmation from the shell company he had set up. I noticed the exact moment his expression shifted. The smugness didn't vanish all at once. It eroded piece by piece, like a cliff falling into the sea. A notification from the escrow agent flashed on his screen. Property sold. Premium offer accepted. His eyes widened. Chloe, look, he whispered, his voice cracking slightly with a frantic kind of excitement. An anonymous investor just outbid everyone. 20% over the asking price. Cash. He was practically vibrating. He thought he was a genius. He thought he had just hit the jackpot, not realizing that the anonymous investor was the same woman who had spent the last 10 years making his coffee and listening to his lies. He was high on the adrenaline of a successful betrayal. He didn't see the pattern. He didn't see the hook. Back in my study, the air was cool and smelled of old books and dried lavender. I leaned back in my leather chair, the blue light of the monitor illuminating the faint smile on my lips. I had authorized the overpayment through a secondary holding company. It was a small price to pay to keep my father's house in my hands, and, more importantly, to keep David's greed focused exactly where I wanted it. I watched the numbers tick over on the escrow account. He was already mentally spending the extra money, probably thinking about an upgraded interior or a custom paint job for his new toy. I picked up my tea, the steam rising in a slow, deliberate curl. Grace isn't weakness, David, I whispered to the empty room. It's control. David was already calling the dealership manager over. We're taking it, he announced, his voice booming across the showroom floor. Full cash offer. The funds are being cleared as we speak. He was celebrating a victory that hadn't actually happened yet. Chloe was clapping her hands, her excitement as superficial as her perfume. They looked like the perfect couple of the modern age, built on deceit, fueled by someone else's loss. I observed the fine lines of excitement around David's eyes. He truly believed he was free. He had no idea that every dollar he was about to receive was a tether, pulling him closer to a reckoning he couldn't possibly survive. I noticed the way the sun was beginning to set over the Manhattan skyline, casting long, needle-like shadows across my office floor. I had spent years being the supportive wife, noticing every small disrespect, every hidden phone call, every pattern of deceit. He thought I was blind because I didn't scream. He thought I was weak because I chose to stay quiet. David leaned in and kissed Chloe, a celebratory gesture for a lie. I watched the grain of the video feed, the pixels capturing his fleeting joy. I leaned forward and closed the laptop. The click of the lid was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. David wanted a new car. I was going to give him a front row seat to his own destruction. The car was silver. The house was mine. And the vengeance was going to be absolute. David entered the executive suite with a stride that claimed every inch of the polished floor. He felt the weight of the Porsche keys in his pocket, a heavy, satisfying reminder of his triumph. He was here to meet the mysterious buyer, the billionaire who had overpaid for a house David considered a pile of rotting lumber. To him, this was the final act of a perfect play. He would sign the last of the papers, collect his commission, and walk away from his marriage without looking back. He noticed his own reflection in the glass doors. He looked successful. He looked like a man who had outrun his own shadows. "Where is he?" David asked the assistant, his voice echoing with an unearned authority. She didn't look up, merely gesturing toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. David didn't wait for an introduction. He pushed the doors open, a practiced smile already forming on his lips, ready to shake the hand of the man who had unknowingly funded his new life with Chloe. The room was silent. The large leather chair at the head of the table was turned toward the window, overlooking the gray expanse of the city. A single folder rested on the table, a deep navy blue, the exact color of the dress Amelia had worn on their first date. David felt a slight, inexplicable chill. "Mr. Sterling?" David called out, his voice slightly less steady. "I'm David. I have the final deed right here." The chair began to rotate. Slowly, deliberately. It wasn't a billionaire in a tailored Italian suit who faced him. It was Amelia. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly over a stack of documents. She looked at him with an expression that was neither angry nor sad. It was empty, a professional void. I observed the way David's smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. I noticed the way his hand, still reaching for a handshake that would never happen, began to tremble. The pink hue of his excitement was replaced by a sterile, sickly white, starting at his neck and moving upward until his face was the color of bone. "Amelia?" he whispered, the name catching in his throat. "What is this? You shouldn't be here. This is a private closing. If you're trying to beg for the house back, it's too late. The money has moved." Amelia picked up a fountain pen. She unscrewed the cap with a rhythmic, clicking sound that seemed to fill the entire room. "Sit down, David," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel. David didn't sit. He gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles turning white. "How did you get in here?" "I'm calling security. You've lost your mind. I noticed you've been spending a lot of time at the Porsche dealership," Amelia said, her gaze never leaving his. "I observed the way you chose the silver one. It's a beautiful car, David. Very fast. But it's a shame you didn't check the fine print on the financing." "What are you talking about?" Amelia slid the navy folder across the table. It stopped exactly an inch from his hands. "I didn't follow you here, David. I invited you here. You spent the last months trying to sell my father's memories to buy a Mistress's car. You thought I was too broken by your disrespect to notice the shell company you created. But I've always been a student of patterns. I noticed when you changed your passwords. I noticed the jasmine perfume on your neck. And I noticed when you tried to use the firm's executive credit line to cover the gap in the house's mortgage." David reached for the folder, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. He saw the letterhead, Sterling and Associates. "You see, David," Amelia continued, her tone as calm as a frozen lake. "I didn't just buy back my father's house. I was the anonymous investor who paid 20% over the market value. Your commission on that sale? It's already been frozen by the board due to an internal audit regarding the misuse of corporate funds." David looked up, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. "The board? Why would they care about a private house sale?" Amelia leaned forward. The storm behind her eyes was finally visible. "Because, David, while you were busy playing king with Chloe, I was using my inheritance to quietly acquire the debt of this firm. This morning, I finalized the purchase of the remaining 15% stake from the retiring partners. I am Gio, the majority shareholder of this company." She paused, letting the silence settle into his bones. "I didn't just buy the house, David. I just bought the chair you're sitting in. I bought the desk you work at. I bought the very air you're breathing in this building." David's knees finally gave out. He sank into the chair, looking small. He looked exactly like the man he was, a thief caught in a room with no exits. "Amelia, please," he stammered, the arrogance stripped away. "We can talk about this." I did it for us. Amelia closed the fountain pen. The click was final. Don't. I've observed you for a decade, David. I know the difference between a surprise and a betrayal. She stood up, smoothing her suit. She looked taller than he had ever allowed her to feel. The house is mine. The company is mine. And your career? That ended the moment you pushed those doors open. She turned her back to him, returning her gaze to the window. The security guards are waiting outside with a box for your personal belongings. I'd suggest you leave before I decide to make the audit public. You have 5 minutes to exit my building. David didn't move. He sat in the silence of the room he thought he owned, staring at the back of the woman he thought he had destroyed. Amelia didn't look back. She didn't need to. She was Kung the one holding the pen. The elevator doors closed on David's career with a final, metallic thud. I observed him through the high-definition security monitor in my new office, a small, frantic figure surrounded by 4 men in dark suits. His dignity was the first thing to go. It didn't leave loudly. It simply evaporated as his access card turned a dull, lifeless red. Red for denied. Red for ended. One of the junior associates he had mocked just yesterday didn't even look up as he passed. Why would they? In this building, power isn't just about the title on the door. It's about the integrity behind it. David's integrity had been sold months ago, and the bill had finally come due. I noticed the way his shoulders slumped, the expensive fabric of his suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for a man of his diminished stature. Outside, the silver Porsche sat under the harsh, unforgiving New York sun, looking less like a dream and more like a tomb. I watched from the window as the heavy flatbed truck backed into position, its amber lights flashing in a rhythmic, mocking pulse. The grind of the metal winch was the only eulogy for David's ambitions. He ran toward the vehicle, waving his arms, shouting about ownership and illegal seizure. He didn't notice the repo man's bored, mechanical expression as he hooked the axle. He didn't notice Chloe standing a few feet away, her designer suitcase already packed and resting on the sidewalk. I observed her face through the glass. The jasmine scent was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating look of a woman who knew exactly when a ship was sinking. I can't be with a man who can't even afford a taxi, David, she said. Her voice carried over the wind, sharp as a razor, cutting through his frantic pleas. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply turned and hailed a black car, her neon pink nails catching the light as she signaled the driver. She didn't look back. She was already looking for the next king to fund her promises. David stood alone on the curb, his hand still reaching for a car that was halfway up the ramp. I noticed the way he looked at his empty palms. Was a silver hood really worth more than a decade of shared sunsets? Is the thrill of a secret worth the weight of total isolation? Then I went back to the house. My house. I stood in the hallway, listening to the silence. It was different now. Though it didn't groan with the weight of his lies, it breathed with the relief of his absence. I picked up a large, black garbage bag. I noticed his expensive Italian shoes by the door, polished on the outside but empty on the inside. Much like the man who wore them, I tossed them in. I observed the silk tie he had worn to the meetings that were actually betrayals. Into the bag, I found a receipt from a jewelry store in Soho tucked inside a drawer, a necklace for Chloe. Purchased on the same day, he told me he was working late to secure our future. I noticed the ink on the thermal paper was already fading. Just like his promises, I walked to the mantel and picked up the photo of my father. I observed the dust on the glass, a layer of neglect that I was finally ready to clear away. My fingers were steady. My heart was quiet. I noticed the way my father's eyes seemed to hold mine, a silent, ancestral approval echoing through the rafters of the home he built. Loyalty isn't a burden, David. It's a foundation. You thought you were building a kingdom on a silver car and a new woman, but a kingdom built on sand always returns to the sea. I dragged the last bag to the curb, noticing the way the garbage truck took it all. The shoes, the ties, the receipts, the lies. The street was clean again. The air was finally clear. I noticed the way the sun hit the cedar walls, and for the first time in years, the house felt like a sanctuary again. You thought you were taking everything from me. You didn't realize that by selling my past, you were actually paying for my freedom. Was it worth it, David? The car, the girl, the lies. Was it worth the silence that is Geo, the only thing left of your name? The morning air in New York was crisp, a sharp contrast to the stagnant, heavy atmosphere that had defined this house for years. I walked through the rooms, noticing the empty spaces where David's things used to be. I observed the faint outlines on the wallpaper where his framed awards, the ones he hadn't actually earned, had once hung. Now, there was only the light. I reached for the handle of the large bay window in the living room. The wood felt smooth under my palm, a familiar texture that reminded me of my father's hands. I noticed the small, intricate carvings in the frame that I hadn't looked at in a decade. I pushed the window open, and a gust of wind swept in, carrying the sound of distant traffic and the promise of a city that never stops moving. I exhaled a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest finally dissolve like sugar in tea. My phone vibrated on the mahogany coffee table. I watched it for a moment, observing the rhythmic pulse of the light. It wasn't David. It would never be David again. I noticed how light the device felt when I finally picked it up. It was Marcus. Amelia, he said, his voice carrying a new tone of respect. The board has just approved the expansion into the London market. The acquisition is complete. We're ready for your signature on the final directives. The firm is officially under your vision now. I looked out at the skyline, noticing the way the glass towers caught the sun. Thank you, Marcus. I replied, my voice a calm, focused anchor. Schedule the meeting for Monday, and make sure the press release focuses on the future. We aren't looking back. I hung up and set the phone down. I noticed a single photograph I had left on the mantel. It was the one of me at my university graduation. I observed the girl in the photo. She looked hopeful, but she also looked like she was waiting for someone else to tell her she was worthy. I smiled at her. I noticed the difference in my own reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at me now didn't need permission. She didn't need a king to build her a kingdom. She had simply taken the crown that was always hers and placed it on her own head. I realized then that David had done me a favor. By trying to sell my past, he had forced me to claim my future. He thought he was taking my anchor, but he was actually cutting the ropes that kept me tied to a sinking ship. I observed the quiet power of the room. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a fortress. And the firm wasn't just a business. It was the vehicle for a legacy that would finally be honored. The true lesson of power is that it doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to scream its name or throw stones. True power is the ability to wait. It's the ability to observe the patterns of those who seek to diminish you, and to quietly move the pieces until they have nowhere left to go. I noticed the way my own heart beat with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Satisfaction isn't found in the destruction of others. It's found in the realization that they no longer have the power to affect your peace. Revenge isn't a fire that burns everything down. The best revenge is a life lived so well, so brilliantly, and so authentically that the person who tried to break you becomes nothing more than a footnote in a much grander story. Grace is the ultimate control. It is the silence before the victory and the peace that follows it. If you are standing in your own hallway today, feeling the weight of a betrayal or the fear of a new beginning, remember this: the house of your life belongs to you. You hold the keys. You decide who stays and who is cleared away with the morning trash. Don't be afraid of the silence. Use it to build your empire. If this story touched a part of your soul, if it reminded you of the strength you've been hiding, share it with someone who needs to hear that the dawn is coming. Because when you finally take control of your own destiny, you'll realize that the view from the top is much better when you've climbed the mountain yourself. I noticed the sun was now high in the sky, illuminating every corner of the room. I took one last look at the empty space on the mantel, then I turned toward the door. I had a world to build, and this time, I was the one holding the pen.